The next speaker is Katalin Cseh-Varga, who is going to be speaking about the art of self-reflection. Katalin currently works as a Herta Finberg Fellow at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna and holds a lecturer position at the Department of Theatre, Film and Media Studies at the University of Vienna. She has finished a book, almost, called The Hungarian Avant-Garde in Late Socialism, Art of the Second Public Sphere, which is forthcoming with IB Tauris. Her research focuses on the theory of public spheres in the former Eastern Bloc, the intellectual history of really existing socialism, archival theory, and creative practices of Hungarian samizdat performance, media spaces, and the media spaces of the Hungarian experimental scene. Katalin's publications include The Troubled Public Sphere, Understanding the Art Scene in Socialist Hungary, a chapter in New Narratives of Russian and East European Art Between Traditions and Revolutions, Performance Art in the Second Public Sphere, Event-Based Art in Late Socialist Europe, and documentary traces of Hungarian event-based art in the book Promote, Tolerate, Ban Art and Culture in Cold War Hungary.
Thank you so much, Klara. Thank you, Artpool, for having me here. It means really a lot that I can be with you today. In the early period of his artistic career, György Galántai began to fill up diaries and notebooks with his ideas, doubts, honest feelings, and inspirations. Lacking like-minded conversation partners, Galántai started debates with himself through, for instance, the interpretation of recent readings. A 1968 entry of his diaries reads as follows. I quote, Hans Scheje's advice. 1. Start with a small experiment and continue afterwards with a bigger one. 2. Your experiment should have a logical order. 3. Strike while the iron is hot. One needs to discover the simplest things with the power of enthusiasm. Expression can only materialize when it affects as enthusiasm. Knowledge is enthusiasm. The work is the realization of the essential with the tool of enthusiasm. In order for an artwork to have clout, it needs to express the spirit of an era with artistic tools. End of quote. In his diaries, Galántai combines citations from books, journals, or lectures with his own analysis and adaptation. Especially during and following his graduation at the Hungarian Academy of Fine Arts, Galántai was concerned with the integrity and the calling of the artist. Questions about the importance of talent and value also appeared on the pages of his diaries. In November 1969, he responded to an essay of Imre Tóth on value and judgment published in 1968 in the magazine Korunk, in English Our Epoch. The comments repeat Tóth's emphasis on the ideal social circumstances of accepting the genius in science. These circumstances should be able to create a fruitful ground for discussions on value and judgment. Galántai, similarly to his thoughts about Scheje, further elaborates on the conditions of intellectual creation that can be improved individually and collectively when the context is supportive. The conditions of intellectual creation were highlighted in the diary and help us to retrace Galántai's aimed at attitude at the time. The, I quote, ability to think flexibly, researcher spirit, the ability to shed a new light on already known things, refusal of traditional solutions, intuitive sensibility, effort for perfection, critical spirit, in-depthness, endurance, and patience, end of quote. His analytical approach and openness towards other fields of interest beyond art was and still is crucial in the oeuvre of Galántai. In the same year, meaning 1969, he convinced himself how important it is to have new experiences, new impulses, and wrote how curious he is about the methods and ways of thinking and essence of, for example, pedagogy, physics, and cybernetics. The pages of the diaries reveal a reflexive individual in search of explanations, links, and potential unconventional ways of doing art. Because Galántai's current way of thinking corresponds on many levels with that of Willem Flusser, I would like to offer here an understanding of reflection by the Czech-born media philosopher. Flusser's inverse understanding of thinking, also reliant on the German thinking behind, Nachdenken, and the Czech analytical thinking, rozmyślení, questions thought as advance. Unlike the progress inscribed into science and technology, in reflection, thought is being controlled and decomposed into its elements. The method of reflection, philosophy, can help us to identify new connections and associations and opens up paths of experiment. Flusser wrote, I quote, "Let us not be afraid of new words and new thoughts. Let us open up new openings and experience of new amazements," end of quote. The investigations and self-conversations of György Galántai on the pages of his diaries and notebooks do mirror the Flusserian reflection because they constantly open up towards new directions. The title of today's paper, The Art of Self-Reflection, emphasizes the connection between art as an intellectual exercise of continuous dispute. Although this dispute is visible in most art projects of Galántai, I also consider it a personal experience shared through the very private medium of the diary. That is what the edition self refers to. With this paper, as announced in the abstract, I invite the audience on a journey across the mind of polyartist György Galántai. Stations of this journey will be important so-called networked personalities that were formative in shaping Galántai's art, but above all, his worldview. The aim is to present an overview of intellectual universes which influence the active archive concept as a reflexive, ephemeral forum. I will do this through the introduction of three important personalities and their respective works. First, I will present endocrinologist Hans Scheje's impact on Galántai through the book From Dream to Discovery on Being a Scientist. This will be followed by introducing Willem Flusser's concept of network, dialogue, and democracy that were in alliance with Galántai's open-mindedness, visible, for instance, in the community-centered Balatonboglár Chapel studio. The third and final figure to be introduced is author and journalist Artúr Köstler. His thoughts reached the metaphysical dimension when drafting the possible rearrangement of human mind and society as we know it. It was from the influential book The Ghost in the Machine, from which Galántai extracted the formula N+1, the essence of, as he states, going beyond oneself. At the end of the paper, I would like to unite these different intellectual universes in the thought of Galántai, concluding with the relevance of this personal intellectual history for the Artpool Archive project. Hans Scheje was one of the most important scientists to gain valuable insight in the field of stress research. He was also the author of a series of popular books that targeted a more general readership. One of these publications was From Dream to Discovery, first published in 1964. The Hungarian translation came out in 1967. The initial Scheje quotation in Galántai's 1968 diary was extracted from this book. As one of the reviewers of the English original stated, I quote, "The book pleads for using intuitive feelings for the way nature works. It argues for simplicity in observation and coordination, and in general for the human side in medical research as against the beauty of science for its own sake," end of quote. From Dream to Discovery deals with the motivations and methods of research. It is a book about science, but because it communicates a certain attitude, it had a broad reception beyond academic disciplines. Intuition and peripheral vision are at the center stage in Cseh-Varga's book, without which innovation or criticism cannot have a real impact. Besides intuition and the importance of marginalities, it was the complexity of the whole organism that very much spoke to Galántai. In another popular book entitled In Vivo, The Case for Supramolecular Biology, published a few years after From Dream to Discovery, Cseh stressed that one should not get lost with tiny little details without even considering how it relates to the whole organism. In an interview in 2014, Galántai mentioned how much seeing the global picture was and is important to him. He always tended to exceed the border of pure aesthetics and formalism and aimed, I quote, "to be a person who understands himself and the epoch he lives in," end of quote. After Galántai read From Dream to Discovery, it brought him a self-discovery, namely that he may not even be an artist. Based on the category of researchers introduced by Cseh in the book, Galántai identified himself as a person close to primary research. An example of the Hungarian artist's care about capturing the current zeitgeist is his curated Constax chronology from 1956 until 1995, available on the website of Artpool. The idols of Galántai, Cseh, Flusser, and Köstler have at least one common denominator. That would be their network personality. Networked means to me the avoidance of short-sightedness in the worldview, also a number of border crossings, both in thinking and in the individual histories of these figures. Cseh, for instance, was multilingual and by nature an intellectual who rejected nationalism. The experience of the two world wars and political manipulations were worlds apart from his international view of science. Almost all three idols were often criticized by fellow scientists, philosophers, and authors. Ideas of Cseh often faced ignorance due to supposed lack of ratio and facts in his experiments. Indeed, these network personalities were often idealistic or utopian, but because of their positive and soaring views, encouraging for an artist full of disappointment with state socialist restrictions and in brackets and its current depressing aftermath. Cseh invited Galántai to look beyond his direct context and self-explaining phenomena. Willem Flusser appeared much later on the horizon of Galántai. He can be understood, though, as a continuation of the spirit which resulted from the confrontation with Cseh's intellectual universe. Flusser's thinking was likewise interdisciplinary and multilingual. In the late 1980s, he introduced the concept of the telematic society, which was based on technologically, medially supported communication with a global span. He imagined a system of collective dialogue very similar to what we know as the internet. Exchange in multiple directions was to Flusser the only democratic form of communication. The telematic society concept of Flusser combines collectivity with the positive features of the network. Reliant on the structural change of media, with the appearance of dialogue, or maybe polylogue, In the media network, linearity loses its importance. It can be the combination of alinearity and multiple standpoints in the net, also affecting social relations, that enhance reflexive thinking and behavior. With the creation of the Chapel Studio in Balatonboglár, Galántai founded a forum of collective creation and exchange that is very close to the realization of the Flusserian project of a networked system across genres and media. The Chapel Studio, with all its event-based art, exhibitions and workshops, also meets the criteria of art as understood by Flusser. According to this art, as Nancy Ann Roth writes, emerges as a gesture, I quote, a particular kind of movement, an expression of one kind of intention rather than a vast inventory of objects or works. Set free of physical objects, art flows out of dedicated institutions and becomes a particular dimension and intensity, a level of commitment potentially available in any human activity at all, end of quote. Balatonboglár, as a Gesamtkunstwerk, was about sharing a physical and mental space and also an attitude in which art and life merged. To Galántai, the chapel gathered those individual autonomies that could coexist and exchange with each other. Similar to Cseh, Flusser was also split by and in between different continents and languages. For this reason, it does not come as a surprise that he promoted international dialogue in his theories. Flusser's crisis of science and rationality and his attempts to overcome it with conceptual alternatives had its origin in a personal trauma caused by Nazism and the Holocaust. An additional component was the philosopher's disappointment with Stalinism he shared with Köstler. The dimensions of Köstler's New World Order draft are, of the three previously presented, the most metaphysical and complex. The all-embracing program of Köstler jumps off from the periphery of science into the transcendent world, mysticism, Eastern religions, and the big whole. In Köstler's utopia, the body, the mind, and the cosmos will unite in a moment that eliminates tensions, ends up in a total catharsis and peace. This esoteric intellectual universe collides with Galántai's interests when he, in the 1990s, encounters Köstler's oeuvre. Galántai got more and more detached from daily experiences and began to partly view them through the lens of global transcendentalism. Köstler's extrasensory perception was especially influential to him. In accordance with new insights in quantum physics, the British-American author developed an approach to parapsychology which adds supernatural elements to human perception. Criticized heavily from different point of views, Köstler's The Ghost in a Machine, published in 1967, sketches a system called holarchy. Without going much into detail, these systems are like networks that consist both of top-down and bottom-up organizational structures at their best. Stability and dynamics are in balance without the ruling center. The formula of the holon, a unit of which holonic systems consist of, is the formula of an autonomy that can consistently grow, mostly in intellectual terms. This formula and the almost utopian system of holarchy are the essence and summary of Galántai's intellectual universe. Galántai, in his art, refuses repetition and standing still. Borders need to be exceeded. Oh, I'm missing a slide here, sorry. In Galántai's reflexive mode of thinking, passing over borders seems to be a key moment. He carries on the open-mindedness of Cseh, Flusser, and Köstler when drawing the contours of art's definition. And because art should leave a mark on all levels of life, Galántai raises information to the level of art. The issue of sharing information brings me to my concluding remarks on the archive. The Active Archive Manifesto formulated by Galántai reflects on almost all previously mentioned cornerstones of the Hungarian polyartist's way of perceiving the Artpool project. To sum it up, the Active Archive never has a moment of standing still because it constantly generates new connections through its production and circulation of information and the researchers adding value to its collection. Events and publications assure that the archive, which began with Galántai's self-conversation on paper, remains a forum of critical reflection. Artpool is a continuous dispute, an ephemeral, and I quote, living situation. The Active Archive functions as a living organism, a network that is constantly open to new influences and border crossings. Such border crossings manifest themselves in the various backgrounds of employees, researchers, and the interdisciplinary research Artpool supports. The whole institution is located on the margins of artwork and structure/infrastructure that gives the archive its invaluable charm. Almost in the terms of hierarchy, Artpool continues to live and expand in the individuals that enter its forum. As autonomous entities, they carry on the open-mindedness and experimental spirit of this Gesamtkunstwerk in order to think and act differently. Thank you for your attention.